Can I forge a hatchet on my first try? In my more than 10 years of blacksmithing, I've forged roses, knives, a 15-foot tall Gothic arch, but never a hatchet. In this video, I set out to forge my first hatchet, but possibly more importantly, to learn how to make hatchets in general. Alright, if we haven't met before, my name's Cori, this is my shop, and here's what's on the agenda for today. So, I have this chunk of metal. This is a partially finished eye drift for making axe and hatchet heads. So, I need to finish this before I'm going to be able to forge any hatchets successfully. But before we get into forging the eye drift, let's back up and talk about the plan for forging the hatchet itself. I carefully sketched many designs which I am definitely incapable of reproducing in metal. After weighing my options and the materials I had available, I settled on the symmetrical fold technique. This technique includes starting with a piece of bar stock, forging it into shape, and then folding it over and welding the pieces of the blade together. This means that you can forge the body of the hatchet out of mild steel and then weld in a little piece of high carbon steel for the cutting edge. If all goes according to plan, the eye drift will really only be needed for final shaping of the hatchet eye. So I decided to do the symmetrical fold technique for my first real hatchet attempt because I don't have a hammer eye punch. Now, I realized that I probably could use like my slot punch. I do have one over here, but it'd be kind of awkward. And then in addition to that, I don't have the material that I would already need. Like, I don't have a big chunk. I have bar stock and I have high carbon steel to weld in for the blade. Also, shout out to Nils Ogren? I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but Swedish blacksmith here on YouTube. I came across his videos on axe making while I was doing research for this project, and beautiful work, and very helpful as well if you've never made a hatchet. Alright, let's fire up the forge and finish making that eye drift. I'm going to start by trying to get just a little bit more length out of the handle of the tool and then move to shaping the other end. On a completely unrelated note, I am so excited about getting my power hammer done. We have tested it, installed a new motor. I'll do a video on this at some point, but we've determined that it rocks rather badly, and so I actually need to pour a concrete slab in my shop to securely mount it to. Measuring it against my handle, I still need it a little bit wider. Fun fact for you guys, not so much for me, when I was getting these shots, I 100% threw the sparks directly onto my camera lens and permanently pitted the glass. There it is. That took longer than I want to admit. It is mid-afternoon now, and we are almost ready to start. So I did actually end up calling it a day after I finished the eye drift, and I'm back the next morning to start on the hatchet. I really wanted to push through and get started on the hatchet on the same day, but it was over 90 degrees on both of the days that I had available to forge, and I eventually decided that it would be best just to call it and start fresh the next morning. Once you put your piece in the fire, it's important to nicely tuck it in under the hot coals before you blast it with a fiery inferno. So I jumped right in by defining my set downs from the center out to define the pole of the axe. At this point, I measured the width of my handle to try to figure out about how much material to include for the sides of the axe. If you watched the video to this point, pause it now and comment below what mistake I just made. Too late, I'm gonna tell you. Okay, I did the set down on the correct side, but I did it in the incorrect direction. So let me try to show you. Whee! So, you notice it trails down what would be the blade when it should set down and then trail towards the pole of the axe. So I think I'm gonna start over, try to wrap my head around this, because we want the blades of the axe to meet flush with one another and leave a cavity for the handle. Let's try this again. This is unfortunately just the reality sometimes. For the first time you make a project, sometimes you do it wrong and you gotta start over. For this do-over piece, I could also tell that my measurements for the different parts of the axe were a little bit off, so I tightened those up and remeasured it before starting again. I also reevaluated my process and started forging my set downs from one end of the piece to the other. And when I say reviewed my process, I mean rewatched Niall's video several times to see how he did it. So now I'm starting to draw out and then shape the sides of the axe, which I should have done before I bent it over in the first place, but if you haven't realized by now, this is a learning process. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out up to this point. It's not perfect, the points don't perfectly line up, there's some asymmetry, but it's close enough for me to bend it over and start attempting to weld. So this is a better shot of where we started out prior to welding. You can see where things got a little off kilter. You can see there's a little bit of stress at the points where I bent it and then opened it back up again. After examining it here, I made an adjustment so that the points lined up and the eye would be symmetrical, and figured I can even up the end of the blade later. I figured my main objective at this point should just be to get it to weld in the correct place. With that done, it's time to prepare to weld. So I'm melting. It is super duper hot. It's, again, 90 degrees. And it's time for me to try to forge weld the blade. I say try to, because I have a bunch of green wood I just processed up, and it's not suitable for forge welding. So I was able to find some charcoal, which is by far the easiest way to forge weld in this forge, and I'm finally starting to see the color that I need to in the forge to forge weld this. So at this point, I started to have just a lot of problems with my fire that I should not have been having. I struggled to get it up to temperature, I struggled to see any kind of welding heat, and in hindsight, I was just flat out tired and not really noticing things that I should have been noticing. Things like this. There's a gremlin in your fire. Clean the clinker out. Look at this. Try and turn it off. This nasty stuff is kind of like molten glass lava ash, and it has been blocking the air holes on my fire. Wonderful. Oh, here's another piece. Gross. Get out of there. Now let's try that. Clean fires for forge welding. So after that innovation, I finally achieved this, one of the very few decent heats that I got to attempt to forge weld. Now, watching this afterwards, I'm able to see that I'm probably not even hitting it hard enough to forge weld it. I kid you not, it took me at least an hour and a half just to get these few heats out of my fire. So I was originally trying to weld the base of the eye together first, kind of start at the back and work towards the front, which is what Niles recommended in his video. But eventually I just started trying to get something to stick, and I just hit where it was hottest. I'm also using these sort of gentle tapping type blows because I originally learned how to forge weld by forge welding chain, which was much smaller than this, and if you laid into it with a really big blow as your first blow, you would smash it flat like a pancake, and I can see that that's part of my technique that needs adjusting for this project. I have a lot left to learn, so pretend that subscribe button is an anvil and smash it with your proverbial YouTube hammers, and watch this video next to see some projects from start to finish.